Greetings from Central Finland and welcome to our last webinar this year, Understanding Your Grit, Firstbeat Life Insights in Emergency Services. We certainly need that grit, at least here in Finland right now, where we only have a couple of hours of daylight per day. And I think that regardless of where you are located, people are certainly feeling a lot of year-end pressure right now. So grit is a good topic for today. I'm Tina Hoffman from Firstbeat, and I'll be joined by my guest Wade Warren in just a little bit. I'll welcome him on stage a little bit later after I lead us into today's topic. Today's focus is in a slightly different sector than we've talked about before, but I would say that most of the lifestyle challenges that we typically talk about, they apply to any sector, but their role in the jobs that we are going to be talking about today is probably even more crucial. I know we have several partners online who are doing some great work in this sector, and hopefully the session also offers some ideas for those who are perhaps looking into some new sectors to work with. This is definitely a very fruitful area to expand to. And in case there is somebody online who is representing some sector of the emergency services, hopefully we can offer you some insights and tools as well. Oops, let me see if I can move to the next slide. Here is our agenda. So very short introduction of Firstbeat and Firstbeat Life for our new listeners. And then a couple of sort of very general level requirements and challenges in the field of emergency services. And I'm using this term as kind of an umbrella term and not going into too much specifics, but just a few findings. And then I'll share 3 separate projects that have utilized Firstbeat data in the past. Just a very short overview of an emergency response operators project, one with police and one with ambulance drivers. I'll share a little bit of what was done and what were the findings. And then after that, we'll move on to discussing with Wade, who has worked with the probation services and community corrections. And we'll talk about his projects and what kind of findings we had from there. And we'll take the questions in the end. The session is recorded, so in case you have to leave halfway through, you'll get the recording afterwards. And we'll be going for 45 minutes, and yeah, the Q&A session will be at the end. So shortly about Firstbeat, we are a real pioneer in this area of measuring people's heartbeats and analyzing heart rate variability and developing technology for different kind of physiological measurements. We work in wellness services and in elite sports today, and maybe the highlight from here is that we do have over 1,000 sports teams who are utilizing Firstbeat Sports Solutions to improve the performance of their athletes. And then we have about 1,000 wellness professionals around the world, different kind of coaches from all different kinds of fields who use the Firstbeat tools with their clients as part of their service offering. And so it's nice to be able to talk about that work from a slightly different sector today. And if this is new to you, be sure to visit our website where we have a lot more information about our sort of scientific background and research background as well. And then shortly about Firstbeat Life, which is the tool or the measurement that we are going to be focusing on and how that's used. We always start with this kind of very accurate data. We use the Bodyguard 3 sensor that measures every heartbeat at 1 millisecond accuracy all day and all night, so sort of in regular daily life. And from that, we analyze heart rate variability. We consider this a professional grade wearable in that professionals can comfortably use that with their clients because they get accurate data that works on people of any shape or size or skin color, for example, and in movement and as well as in rest. And then in addition to the device that gathers the data, the client has the Firstbeat Life app on their phone where the sort of the heart rate variability data is converted into concrete insights about stress, about recovery, sleep, and physical activity. And client gets their results and their data into the app and can learn a lot about it from there. But then what makes this truly a professional offering so that people like today's guest Wade or many of you who are online, that you can use this tool with your clients is that we have developed this Firstbeat Life professional portal that allows you to manage your clients, manage projects. You can access your clients' individual results on the portal so you can provide truly effective coaching for them, and you can also create group reports for them. And of course, we provide training for that as well. So that's where the professional tool really comes into play, that this is something you can use with your clients. And then to today's topic, so just a couple of highlights. This is not my area of expertise by any means, but I did a little bit of internet searching, and I was speaking with Wade, and I was speaking with a couple of other people who worked in these sectors, and sort of picked up three big themes that came up, not non-specific to any specific job, and of course not going into details, but one is clearly this need to be able to operate effectively in crisis situations and under heavy pressure. And this probably comes into a bigger role in these sectors than, for example, in knowledge work like myself. My crisis might be if Zoom doesn't start right when I'm starting a webinar, or my camera is not working, and that's my mini crisis in that situation. But in this field, the crises are very different and the pressures are very different and often with serious consequences. So this is a key requirement for anybody who works in this field. Many of the sectors, sufficient physical fitness is a core factor. This is an area that currently has been recognized more, and many sectors have some kind of a regular testing for this. And then an area maybe that is up and coming more and is talked about more today than maybe 10 or 20 years ago is that people need to have sufficient sleep and recovery so that they can operate under those heavily pressure situations or crisis situations. So it's recognized today that the need for recovery and sleep is absolutely crucial. And then a few of the common challenges in these sectors, what are identified as areas that need to be addressed. This was one that came up regardless of what I was looking at: trouble leaving work at work and winding down. Because of the heavy demands and difficult, often disturbing issues that people might be dealing with during work, it's not easy to switch your mind off afterwards, and that can compromise recovery. And then sleep, obviously, is identified and recognized as a major challenge. Sleep deprivation, one of the biggest challenges with police and other emergency services sectors, especially those who do shift work. And of course, we all know that there is an increased risk of many different physical and mental health problems if you are chronically sleep deprived. So clearly an area that needs to be addressed. And then poor exercise habits due to, for example, heavy workload or doing different kind of shift work may be a little bit surprising, because in this sector there are also a lot of people who might be very much into fitness, who are really taking care of themselves, but then there's maybe the other half or the other part of the workers who are neglecting exercise habits and regular physical activity because of the heavy demands of the job. So these are areas where, when we then start looking at Firstbeat Life, this is something where Firstbeat Life really kind of comes into its own, because we can address these issues very concretely from each individual's personal life. We look at work, but we also look at time outside of work, during leisure time and during sleep. For those who are new, this is a typical example of a 24-hour graph from Firstbeat measurement. The red color means some kind of stress. It's that fight or flight response that we all need to keep going during the day. The green color means recovery. That means that your body is slowing down and the parasympathetic part of the nervous system is active. And the blue color means physical activity. And this kind of a measurement, it's a great starting point for a discussion for any professional, but also particularly in these kind of fields that we are talking about today, because it allows us to understand sort of the real life demands that they might have, and also sometimes a challenge might come from outside of work rather than from actually during the work. And many times the solutions, the most important solutions, might address sleep habits and evening habits rather than what's going on at work. And we'll look at a couple of examples from Wade's projects at the end of today's session as well. So short review of three projects that we've done in the past. This one was done in Finland a few years ago with emergency response operators. And their focus on this project was specifically on recovery. How were they recovering and how could they improve their recovery in case that was a challenge area. The challenges that were ahead of time identified in this project, one was that they were working 12-hour shifts, so either day shift or night shift, so long shifts, and constantly switching between day and night. The psychosocial load was identified as being quite heavy in this sector, and also their work was mainly just sitting at that desk with your headset on, so very much sitting during the work. In the pre-questionnaire that was done for the project, 90% nearly reported problems with sleep on a regular basis, And also they reported commonly having trouble switching off and some kind of brain fog because of the intense nature of the work. 50 operators took part in this project. It was a 3-month project that included use of Firstbeat Live for 3 months, had some group coaching sessions, personal coaching, and also different kind of survey tools to determine what were the challenge areas at the beginning of the project and also at the end. The red cards and yellow cards mentioned here, this is something that comes directly out of the Firstbeat Live assessment. Red cards mean that the result was so sort of troubling and so low on recovery, so heavy on stress, that the program actually recommends that that person should have a health check by a doctor to make sure there is not something more serious in the background. 3 people had one of these kind of red cards and 5 people had a yellow card, which means kind of a red flag or a warning that recovery is very, very poor across the measurements. And 8 out of 50, it's a significantly higher percentage of these kind of warnings that typically come from our projects. It was seen that older staff had more stress, they slept less and moved less than the younger staff, but all across the whole group, 20% had poor recovery, specifically during workday. Very low physical activity during workdays, which was expected, but the measurement also confirmed that. Factors that hindered recovery during their work and what they felt themselves was this kind of very heavy workload, inability to affect their work, and trouble switching off afterwards. Afterwards was also an area that many of them identified. And then furthermore, on the areas that improved, even if it was a short project, only 3 months, just kind of like a pilot project, subjective well-being improved during this project, and also the percent of those people who had very poor recovery, that decreased quite significantly. There is a Finnish language summary story on this on our website that you can find if you want to read more, and there was also a master's thesis done on this project. Then this is a project I did with some police officers. It was a pilot project done years ago. This was close to 15 years ago, so we used our old method, but it had a few interesting findings from that as well. I got to work that myself. We measured supervisors who were mostly working on the field, so not in the office, but on the field, morning and evening shifts, but no night shifts. And the goal of the project was to improve the officers' understanding of their stress levels, both during work and after work, and specifically how they are able to recover after demanding shifts. There was a baseline measurement at the start of the project and then a follow-up measurement 2 months later. This was our old method, so it was not possible for them to measure themselves all the time. Not surprisingly, the stress levels were in general very high during the workday. The pace was intensive. Many said that the workload is very heavy, a lot of interruptions, and also they were going through some kind of organization change. So clearly the daytime stress levels, there were high red bars pretty much across the workdays. And the discussion that we facilitated afterwards was focusing on how to add recovery, how to learn to manage that workload better, but specifically then how to find recovery strategies after work, because it might not be possible to change the daily routine so much. Very low amount of physical activity on work days was maybe a slightly surprising finding, because they felt like they were on their feet, but mainly it meant moving, getting up and down from the car several times during the day, but not actually being very physically active. In general, people slept too short of a time, but this group had pretty good sleep habits, so that they slept well when they were sleeping, so that was a positive finding. And then one more project. This was done in the UK case, NHS ambulance drivers. We can send you a link to this video that was made of this project. This was also done quite a long time ago, so some of the methods are a little bit old from what we do today. This was carried out by Simon Shepherd from Optimal Life, and we can send his, if you find the video, you'll also be able to contact him if you want to learn more about that. But basically the project was called Peak Performance Program. It was done for a hazardous area response team, so very demanding response, emergency responder team. It was known that physical fitness is clearly a key safety and performance indicator, and that had been a focus of that group. But in this project, they wanted to understand more about sort of the 24/7 view about their lifestyle, about their recovery. and how physiological data together with this kind of a energy profiler tool could be used to boost behavioral change. And a couple of the results from this project, one was that work, even at the end of the project, it was about as stressful as it was in the beginning. There's not many ways to change that kind of the nature of that kind of a work day. But over the course of the project, sleep results improved quite significantly. There was more recovery across the 24-hour periods. And also the online tool that assessed productivity showed some clear improvements. And participants subjectively also felt that they were coping better. And these results are really nicely highlighted in that video, so we'll send that to you afterwards. A couple of the things, just some comments that the guys or the participants were mentioning on the video as well. I can't just focus on work, but what I do outside of work to stay healthy and take care of myself, that was clearly an insight that many of them got, that they have to look at the bigger picture. I understood how my evening habits after a hard shift affect my sleep, in the good and in the bad. And then they mentioned, for example, when I had a couple of beers after work, I realized what a detrimental effect it had on my sleep. And many of them had to consider that quite a bit as part of their sort of lifestyle and wellness habits. So that's a short nutshell of what kinds of things have been done. And I know many other projects have been done by many of our partners, and hopefully we'll be able to share some of them also going forward. But at this point, I think we're going to have a bit of a discussion with Wade Warren. He's a retired criminal justice professional from the US, and today works as a life and leadership coach. And maybe I'll actually stop sharing and we can just have a chat for a little while, and then in the end we'll look at some results. So welcome, Wade, and maybe we can start off by you telling just a short story about your kind of like where you came from and how you are at where you're doing today, wellness coaching.
Yeah, yes. Good morning and good afternoon, Tina, and thank you. So, my career started long before I probably became an adult. Both my brothers and my father were first responders and law enforcement officers, and so that was always probably a goal of mine as I grew up. I took a little different path and got into community corrections. I did some institutional corrections early on in college and whatnot, and kind of found that my passion was in community corrections, being in the community, working kind of with folks and kind of the rehabilitative side and the protection of society and that auspice. So I did that. I worked in the state system for quite a bit of time before I was able to get hired on the federal side with United States courts and U.S. probation. And at the same time, I was in the Army, in the military, and had some active duty time and a deployment to Iraq. And so, as my federal career took off in 1997, I kind of moved into the leadership end of that business, and then ended up being the chief from 2006 to 2021 in the District of North Dakota, and was also on the National Wellness Committee for about 13 years. And so that really shaped a lot of my work around the things we're going to talk about today, and along with my experience and the things that I see in my career and also in the military side. And so I've been involved some way, shape, or form in kind of what I call physiology-based coaching for probably since 2009 in one facet or another. Wasn't really able to use Firstbeat a lot in the federal system. We did use it when I did retire, then certainly is something that I wanted to do. So that's kind of a nutshell of where I've come from and kind of how I got there. But worked in kind of the leadership, life coaching end as well. And when I retired, went and got some more certifications, and then obviously expanded my knowledge base and capabilities around Firstbeat, and have had really luck with that.
That's where we connected. Before we actually look a little bit more closely at the projects that you have done and you are doing right now, tell us just a few words about grit. That's in the name of today's webinar, is understanding grit. And I think most of us kind of know what it means, but you had some interesting background about that.
Yeah, so grit is something that I found has some traction within the folks that I'm working with, and we're still looking at that. I think if you look in the dictionary, there's a number of definitions, but courage, resolve, um, continue to show up are things that show up in the dictionary. One of the books that I found rather profound is Angela Duckworth's book Grit, and she describes grit as where passion and perseverance meet. A very profound book, and I think within that she speaks to resilience, and so I bring that in as I work with folks. And sometimes, to be honest with you, as I'm working with folks, if we use grit as a foundation, um, how they might contextualize it, see it, believe what it is, or how it works for them kind of becomes maybe their framework as well. It can expose them to some of these things, but it's perhaps a way to look at that in the military and first responder and even the community corrections field. I've always looked at those as very gritty forces,
Mhm.
but as we move along and we look through it from the eyes of well-being, perhaps we can use that grit almost to a detriment as well, and pushing too hard for too long without sufficient recovery, sleep, and those kinds of things. So,
Yeah.
so yeah. So this idea of accumulating grit, growing grit, that kind of thing, sometimes is certainly foundations or ways to contextualize some of these things when we're working kind of in that coaching environment along with Firstbeat.
Yeah, and I in Finnish we have this word called sisu, which is quite known even for some non-Finnish speakers. But it's a similar kind of this kind of tough, greedy mindset. But I really agree with the idea that it can also go overboard, and that's where maybe we also need to remember resilience. That sisu or grit, it shouldn't mean that you just push through the pain and keep going, but you do need to pay attention to a balance. And that's where I think resilience is a slightly different look at that, but it's good for us to have some different terminology for that.
Yeah.
What would you say that on the field that you're working with right now, I showed some of the sort of known challenges in the area of emergency services. In your personal experience, what are some of the biggest challenges in the field that in the groups that you're working with?
Yeah, so within the group that I'm working with now, just to give a little background, so you know, United States probation pretrial services officers are not first responders as seen through the eyes of traditional sense. They are federal law enforcement officers. Their jobs are good jobs, but demanding, difficult. Really, three missions there for them: protection of society, we assist the court in the fair administration of justice, and we facilitate long-term change. And so they are really the investigative and supervision arm of the United States courts in what they do. In many ways, risk managers, I guess.
Mm.
And from low risk cases to high risk, we use a lot of science in what we do. The business can be callous, much like other first responders types, and those things can obviously begin to become internalized. And and then all things personal end too that we deal with, along with the accumulated stress, the high workload. Really, it's in the investigative side. Those investigations go before the U.S. courts, can actually end up in the Supreme Court in hearings, and so they're meticulous. They're well done. They're under pressure,
Mm.
time constraints to get them done. Really good investigators, and then you have folks out in the community that are supervising those cases, and obviously a lot of worry about those cases going bad, and you having critical events and from acute side. And so there's a lot of accumulation of stress along the way, but it's a very um, perhaps a much less known
Yeah.
federal law enforcement entity, but very results oriented, and
Yeah.
so very responsive and that kind of thing. So there's a lot of those things that you see within traditional first responders as well, and then kind of how we accumulate stress.
Yeah. Great. And then the actual project, so the actual sort of package or service, you did a project in Alaska that actually is still ongoing, and you're doing a project in Iowa. And so could you tell a little bit about like what exactly did you offer them? What was the package that you started doing with them sometime last,
Yep.
about
So
a year ago, I guess?
absolutely, yeah. So Alaska, yep. So there was some that started a little bit earlier. We actually started using Firstbeat devices along with what I offered is life leadership, well-being, and physiology-based coaching. And obviously, Firstbeat within that for those it's voluntary within those auspices. If people want to, what I call to do a 90-day cycle with Firstbeat and get baselines, and we coach around that, review that, but we also bring the other types of coaching. And so we had 15 folks in Alaska, and then another project in northern Iowa that just wrapped up. And so we'd have a combination of Firstbeat, and we also offered in that some other physiological devices, trainers, if you will, to help with mind-body integration and that kind of thing. And so those were really the foundations. And both, I give a lot of kudos to both chiefs, their leadership, and their staff. That takes quite a bit of courage to I refer to well-being as not skin deep. So this obviously shows things at a deep level, and for them to be able to do that and even do that collectively
And that was
share.
actually, from my point, that was a great thing to see. Wade and I actually met in Colorado in September, and I got to be a guest in one of his sort of facilitated group discussion. I did a little bit of a Firstbeat bit, and then we took Q&A. And what was really great to see was that the chiefs were in the room. I mean, they were physically in the room. The whole group was there, but the chiefs were also there. So that's one of the findings from all kinds of corporate projects, that it really takes the leadership's buy-in to make it effective. And they were really setting a good example. They were willing to sit there and listen and even share some of their own learnings. So that was really a positive thing to see.
Yes, that is key, I think, Tina, and that we speak to vulnerability. I think Brene Brown does a very good job of that, and showing that vulnerability and that exposure and that openness with staff, and also that growth mindset, I think is really important. So.
Yeah, great project. Logistically, couple more questions. So, like when you first started the project, how did you meet them up and hand them devices, or did they order them via mail, or how did that actually work out?
Yeah, so in Alaska, I forwarded the devices ahead of time. In Alaska, I was able to get there within the first 3 weeks, and I spent some time in the office, both meeting with them collectively and individually, and kind of getting them set up and doing some of the work there. It was a little bit different in northern Iowa, given some logistical stuff. We started more virtually, sent them the equipment, and then I did some office site visit stuff later on in the project. Both of them worked. I found the site visits to be really helpful, as well as the the virtual coaching and stuff that we did. Yeah. The other thing that we did with each of them is what we called facilitated discussions, which you participated in, and those covered a wide array of topics from how Firstbeat works, a higher level of physiological, how you can use that physiology and that data, to mind-body integration, to leadership principles, to whatever might kind of fit. We did quite a bit of work around compassion, self-compassion, positive neuroplasticity with one of my colleagues, who's very gifted in that. And then, for instance, we'll use the book Leadership and Self-Deception in most of the work that I do as a preference, as a way to kind of look at leadership and accountability as well.
Yeah, and that's great. I'd say for all of our partners, we always try to emphasize that Firstbeat Life. Clearly, it's the most effective and powerful when it's integrated into some kind of a package that includes other things. So as a standalone measurement, it still has value, but it's that much more powerful when it's integrated into a program like that. So that's great. We'll look at two actual cases and a few examples of data, but before that, maybe just on a general level, could you like highlight a few of sort of positive learnings, what people did learn during this, what kind of positive things did they discover from the data or as part of this whole project? So what did you
Yes,
find?
absolutely. So, I think first and foremost, one of the common themes in talking with staff was this idea of the awareness and even to try to cultivate more curiosity and awareness around things of just being aware from a high level and an accurate level of the impact of different things from a day of too much push, maybe at night, maybe um, they're from a sleep hygiene standpoint, how that might impact your overall sleep through the night and and how effective different techniques. And I find it, I think this is individualized a lot of times. One thing seems to work better for others sometimes, and even in how they might stack different things. And I'm referring to mind body integration, whether it's breathing, breath work, or yoga, or meditation, to just taking a break, but being able to disconnect for a little bit from the long push. So those were really kind of that awareness level of that.
Yeah.
And then I'll trying to move into making some changes, and we did see some changes within each group, and some of those are still working on this thing.
Yeah. So if you had to pick out two sort of main challenges, or maybe challenges or problems with your lifestyle, so what would those two be?
I think sleep, obviously, and you've talked a lot about that,
Yeah.
and then how important it is from a recovery standpoint, but how much it's impacted by the daytime, right? What goes on during the day. It's not that you can just shut the light switch off and you get right to sleep and have a good night's sleep. They're all interrelated. So I think it's those two, and also physical fitness.
Yeah.
A lot of correlations from people on, that, hey, I think I slept better if I worked out at a certain time at a regular intensity versus working out at 9 o'clock at night.
Yeah.
And kind of seeing those connections as well.
Yeah, and I remember the time that I joined the session, we had a couple of good discussions about that too. That's some of the things were a little bit surprising, but the data helped them maybe to see that. All right, I'm going to share my screen now, and let's look at two sort of cases. These people have given, of course, their permission. We're not going to share anything personal about them, but they've agreed that this can be discussed. So this was from the Alaska case, I think, and we called it attention to evening routine. So that already a little bit reveals what the person learned. But this was the first measurement at the beginning of the project. So what kind of challenges was he having, and what were maybe the things that you kind of picked out from the data?
Yes. So obviously, like you said, baseline, you can see quite a bit of activation stress there with little recovery during the day. And then kind of moving into the nighttime, you can see the sleep is degraded. And as we worked in kind of that coaching atmosphere and reviewing this, the person really looked to sleep hygiene as maybe one of the first things to look at, and became quite intentional about that, and worked on that. And then we'll show, another measurement here in a little bit. But high pressure job, a lot of push, and quite a few things that they have to do during the day, kind of went from one thing to the next and then moved right into the night, and obviously impacted the sleep as well.
Yeah. Yeah, and as many of you already know, that basically this kind of a red day, it's not fundamentally, it's not a bad day, it's not necessarily a problem, but when that activation level is sort of up all day at work and then pretty much the whole evening after that, then it easily, what happens is that your body stays on and engaged even while you're trying to sleep. So she might have had 9 hours of sleep, but clearly it wasn't as restorative as it could be. And that's where some of those kind of intentional and personalized habits that Wade was talking about, the data can kind of help people see that what could I maybe do a little bit better. And yeah, here is her data about 45 days later, so about halfway through the project. So can you tell a little bit about this?
Yes. So as I mentioned, that intentional work to work on recovery, and you can see some of that even around 18 to 1900 and through the night. that really, I think, helps set up the sleep, plus the sleep hygiene. In this case, I think instead of TV or other things, some reading, some wind down techniques that the person felt were becoming helpful. And then when we did the 45-day measurement around the 45-day period, it was pretty exciting to see this, not just for me, but for the individual as well.
Yeah.
To see that it was actually working and there was some positive effect. And I think that's where the use of physiology and Firstbeat is so effective, because a lot of times you can do these things, you wonder if they're working, right? And here that discipline and that practice was paying off with better sleep.
Yeah, it's great. I mean, obviously, not every case is going to have such a significant improvement in such a short time, but it is possible because sometimes there are just very concrete things that a person can do specifically to improve their sleep. And a little bit similar to one of the project, the NHS ambulance drivers project, what they discovered was that they were not really able to change the redness of the workday very much, but they were able to change the amount of recovery afterwards, which allows them to then perform again at a high level the next day. All right, let's look at one more case and then we have time for a few minutes of questions. So if you have any questions or comments, just write them in the Q&A and then we'll look at them at the end, and one of us is happy to answer them. But yeah, this case, tell us a little, before I saw the data, maybe tell a little bit about the background for this
Yep.
person.
So this is a case where we do not have before data. This person had worked in the system for quite some time and done a specific job for a long time, and became, before we got involved, over actually a period of probably 18 months to 2 years, began to make some significant lifestyle changes. And those included both on the personal level and professional level, even to in job alignment, role alignment, and that kind of thing. Made a lot of changes over time. And, we'll see in the data that it's pretty very positive with a lot of recovery. And so I think they made some, changes possible, and it does have effects. And like you said, Tina, it doesn't always look the same, right? I mean, I can do a lot of sleep work. I might not get the same effect that the person before had, but their age might be different too, and different things. But you can see in this case just a tremendous amount of recovery. And I've seen this with a number of folks that's during active work, actively engaged in a high degree of recovery while they're actually on the job, in the job, working very constructively. And so a lot of times you'll see a lot more red and activation, but I will see folks like this. But this individual was pretty convinced that if we would have been able to do a baseline, say a couple of years earlier, it would look dramatically different. So very much convinced that the changes they made were in the discipline and all the things kind of that they put into a wellness practice showed itself within this data.
Yeah, so for her, it was kind of like confirmation that the hard work and the changes she had made, it was looking very good in her physiology, and obviously she was feeling better, but also the result showed that. So we don't always have that before and after, but data doesn't always just show what's wrong. It can sometimes also show people that, okay, despite of my stressful job, I'm actually able to recover really well. So it can have value in many different kind of situations, definitely. Great, thank you. And yeah, Wade's still working. He's still continuing work and hasn't done the final sort of project summary yet. So we're not going to be looking at the group level findings yet, but he's going to be reporting that to both of the organizations, and hopefully they'll get some sort of group level learnings and things to then focus on after that as well. Thank you so much for sharing those insights and information. It's definitely an area that I don't know so much about, but I have people close to me who are working in some kind of emergency services. So it's interesting to understand that sector a little bit better, and definitely an area I'd like to see more work being done, because these kind of simple basic lifestyle factors obviously are of core importance there as well. We had one question ahead of time, but if you have any questions right now, you can write them in the Q&A. I'll check that at first to make sure that I'm not skipping some questions there. No, there's no questions yet, but there's a question that had been sent ahead of time, that what specific things can shift workers do to minimize negative health effects? And maybe we can both chime in on this just a little bit. I haven't done shift work myself. All of us probably know the powerful research that's coming out showing how the health effects of doing especially 3-shift work or night shift work are not great. It's really tough on the body and on the mind, and is associated many health problems. From my viewpoint, what I would say that in most cases, probably the focus has to be specifically on that kind of a 24 hours of well-being view. So understanding that how you spend your time outside of work, what kind of efforts you are making to, for example, make sure that you get as good sleep as possible, starting with prioritizing enough time for sleep. It's tough if you're doing 3-shift work, because your body clock and your biorhythms are not going to be in sync all the time because you're switching. But there are many concrete and practical sleep strategies that can certainly make it easier to sleep during the day, starting from earplugs and making sure your room is dark, and providing a quiet environment, and really trying to emphasize that sufficient time allowed for recovery. So that's probably the starting point. And then another one I would highlight is sufficient physical fitness. No need to be a elite level athlete, but sufficient physical fitness certainly helps the mind and the body cope with those kind of heavy demands. So that's where I would put my focus on. But do you have any other additional thoughts on that?
No, those are excellent, Tina. Within the work that I've done, I've worked with a little bit within the medical community with it. There were some folks that are doing shift work. And so some of the things that they talked about, in addition to what you said, the physical fitness was key, the self-care end, and also nutrition they found for themselves was really a big part of that as well. And really taking care of themselves and trying to mitigate the effects of that shift work as much as possible, and as much as they have to modify their sleep schedule when they're on their off shift, trying to go back to days, just trying to really take care of themselves and pay attention to those key things, and stress and recovery practices as well, I found really helpful.
Yeah. One more question and then we can end today's session. So was there any sort of pushback or concerns or worries that people had, that can this be used against me, or do they dare to wear this kind of a device? So how did they in general take to that kind of an idea?
Yeah, not a lot of pushback. We covered a lot of those things about how was the information going to be used, who got to see it. Other than them, unless they talked about it, or we get an anonymized permission to use like we did here. It was, it's held very strictly confidential. The chief doesn't even see individual information. And so we covered that early.
Yeah. That's super important in any project.
Yeah, I think once in a while, the first measurement, sometimes perhaps people want to get a good measurement the first time, right? And so they might wait a little bit to when things maybe become a little bit more conducive, maybe not so much pressure. But then as we go along, hopefully they start to look at those high demand times, and those more difficult and challenging times actually are very revealing with Firstbeat, and some of the most helpful things that you can see. So I think maybe a little reluctance in the beginning to put that on when it was most demanding, or they felt that maybe it wouldn't score that high. But my hope is over time that wasn't such a factor.
Yeah, that's our job, to sort of relieve those kind of worries and help people understand that it's a personal tool designed to make them understand themselves better. And it's not about 100 points, but about making those kind of valuable learnings. So great. Thanks everyone for joining us today. And thanks Wade so much for sharing your thoughts and being willing to tell about this project. And we'll send you the recording via email. And if you have any questions to Firstbeat, here is our contact information. And also we'll send in the thank you email, we'll make sure you have Wade's email as well. So if you want to ask him a little bit more about some of the methods, other methods that you were using. So there was a couple of people mentioning that they'd like to hear more about that. So you might just drop an email to Wade, and I'm sure he's more than happy to discuss on that. So thank you for joining us. And since this is our last webinar this year, I also want to wish people very happy end of the year and happy holidays when you get there, and make sure you take some time to build on that resilience and hopefully also some good grit for the upcoming year. So have a great night, and we'll see you next time.